can mean the difference between isolation and a thriving connected life for vulnerable riders. BHA urges you to provide full service area coverage within RTD boundaries and offer fair relief for those with the greatest needs. These are modest, reasonable adjustments with life-changing impacts. Your leadership today will set a precedent for equitable, inclusive transit, ensuring everyone can live better through connection. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Kristen. Are there any other speakers, Mr. Kroll?
Chair Bouquet, at this time, I see no further speakers in the queue.
And then board office staff for any emailed comments received for today's meeting.
There were not.
Okay. With no other participants in the queue, we will close this section of public comment. Thank you all. All right, we're now moving on to our next item, and that's the September board meeting agenda review. As there are no recommended actions for the committee's consideration, we'll move to the September board meeting agenda review. Similar to July's agenda, the Access on Demand program modifications and the Access on Demand contract extensions were moved up onto the agenda to action items under Section 9. Due to significant public interest I anticipate on those items, I do believe it would be beneficial to have these discussed and voted on by the board earlier in the evening or during the meeting. Likewise, given significant public interest in the finishing fast tracks report, that discussion has likewise also been moved forward on our agenda. Please note that the given amount of public comment and discussion on those items, along with the finishing fast tracks report, the meeting will likely run long and we may have to act to extend the meeting or postpone items. There has been one change to the agenda, and that is the 3 director-initiated item from Director Pagliari, Nicholson, and Larson regarding window coverings on RTD vehicles and our system advertising policy. And this will now be a discussion item with a revised title of Window Covering Prohibition and System-Wide Advertising Policy Amendment. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as detailed?
So moved.
I have O'Keefe as the mover. Do we have a second?
Second.
And Nicholson as the second. Is there any discussion on this? Secretary Nicholson.
Thank you. Yes. I noticed that we have not yet received the finishing fast tracks report. It was not included with the packet. I was hoping we could get some, which usually everything that's in the would be included in the executive packet. Can we get some clarity on from staff on when that will be circulated and whether it'll be included with the final packet and all of that? So,
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. As it relates to the unfinished fast tracks report, considering that this is a discussion item that is intentionally being brought before the board, when the board packet is released for public consumption and disseminated to all of you, that report will be included in the notice materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Are there any no votes on this action? Okay, seeing none, it'll pass 4-0, 1 absent. Thank you. Okay, we're now moving on to our discussion items for today. And the first item is our monthly government relations report for September 2025. Mr. Michael Davies, our government relations officer, would you please present this item at this time?
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Michael Davies, government relations officer. I have a brief report for you all starting at the federal level. Really, the focus is on the federal appropriations process and keeping the federal government open at this point. As you may recall from previous government relations reports, the federal fiscal year does end September 30th, and there is no agreement at this point on either a continuing resolution or a full year funding package to keep departments and grant programs moving forward. And I would not characterize negotiations at this point between the White House and Congress as positive or productive. So it is really up in the air, and it will come down to the very final moments of this federal fiscal year to see if the federal government stays open. So that's really the focus at the federal level. As a reminder, even in a government shutdown, US DOT staff, at least at the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration, Much of their staff is funded out of the Highway Trust Fund, which is already an ongoing source of funding. So they do receive funding to keep doing their job and processing grants. That has been the practice in the past during federal government shutdowns. So we'll look for guidance. In the case of federal government shutdowns, Office of Management and Budget does release guidance to all of the departments, and we'll of course be looking for guidance related to the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we'll communicate out any impacts to the board. Moving to state matters, the interim session did kick off with the House and Senate Interim Committee Transportation Legislation Review Committee holding 2 meetings in early September. On September 8th, RTD's Chief Financial Officer and myself, Government Relations Officer, did present briefly before the TLRC on requested topics, and there was a few questions and a few requests for follow-up items, and staff did follow up with the committee and disseminate answers to a few of the members' questions, but generally a good opportunity to provide some information, especially to new members of the TLRC. On September 9th, the following day, the second meeting was held of the TLRC. At this meeting, the TLRC does go through a process of looking at interim bills and really is allowed to kind of pick 5 policy topics where they can ask legislative staff to draft interim bills leading into next year's regular session starting in January. 5 bills were approved for legislative concepts to kind of be drafted into actual legislation. None of those bills touched on transit or have any impact on RTD. So that is really the work that TLRC has done thus far. There is one final meeting scheduled of TLRC this year, and that's on October 21st. Lastly, I just want to touch on the Clean Transit Enterprise process, and RTD staff has been following the work of the Clean Transit Enterprise very closely. A notice of funding availability was released by the Clean Transit Enterprise, which covers the formula grant program. So this is last year's SB 230 funding, or sorry, 2 years ago, SB 24-230 that established oil and gas fees to fund transit. 70% of that funding goes to the Formula Transit grant program. And that really is meant to fund transit operations. It should be noted that the notice of funding availability specifically states that capital programs are not eligible to be used. You can fund rolling stock purchases, and a few agencies have been approved thus far by the committee to, say, buy a bus to then be associated with an expansion of transit service. But that is the extent of capital that is allowed under that. Otherwise, it really is meant to fund transit operations and pay for the salaries and benefits of those operating that transit. I think that covers it on the state side. And then lastly, on the local side, RTDs continue to engage with local officials. And I'll just note with Director Whitmore and myself participated with the North Area Transportation Association and gave a specific presentation on August 28th. And that group includes a number of mayors and commissioners from the Adams County area. And so a good opportunity there. And I know staff, as Director Nicholson mentioned with the unfinished fast tracks report, I know staff is working to schedule a number of engagements with local governments in the following month for those that are interested in that unfinished fast tracks report and during the public comment period there. That concludes my government relations report, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. Before I take questions, I just wanted to thank you for representing the agency very well during the TLRC meetings, and just want to say a big thank you. And I heard a lot of positive comments, so thank you. Director O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I did also extend that having watched Mr. Davies at the state and federal level, we have an exceptional person leading the program. What is the chance for a bill that would, I mean, I'm not talking about whether it would pass, just introduction for our frontline workers having the penalty for assault moved from a misdemeanor to a felony. Thank you.
Mr. Davies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I do plan to address that specifically because I know Director O'Keefe, you submitted that in response to the solicitation with regards to the draft 2026 Legislative and Government Relations Program. So I do intend to cover that in the next item. But generally, to summarize, in discussions with our lobbyists, in discussions with lawmakers at the Capitol who did support us last year through this effort, there's not a lot of appetite to revisit that legislation. And just to remind you all, that legislation that we advocated for and passed last session just took effect last month. So I think a lot of lawmakers are looking for data, looking for impacts of what they did, seeing if DAs respond differently. And so I think it's a wait and see approach from those lawmakers who were sympathetic and very supportive of last year's effort.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for jumping the agenda.
Perfect. Secretary Nicholson.
So yes, Mr. Davies, I was wondering if you can speak to, so I think, we all know the Accountability Committee is working on basically recommendations for a piece of legislation for next year. And you mentioned TLRC didn't have any legislation that was directly related to RTD. Are there any other pieces of legislation that you're aware of that are being worked on that could potentially impact RTD that are out there right now?
Mr. Davies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Outside of TLRC, as you stated, there's nothing there. The only other piece of legislation that I'm aware of and have seen in a draft form is actually legislation that you have sent over to us with regards to a transit equity legislation, and that's very much still in the draft form, but it is legislation that you have worked on with a representative of the House thus far. Outside of that, I have not seen any other legislative actions that may be introduced in the new year. I do know as part of CASTA, the Colorado Association of State Transit Agencies, there is an effort to look at some legislation really having to do with rural transportation agencies and their ability to form essentially a version of a RTA in places of the state where they have some don't have that ability right now. So those are the only pieces of transit direct legislation that I'm aware of.
Thank you. I appreciate
you.
that.
Dr. Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for the background noise. I had to run down to Morrison Road today. Mr. Davies, with respect to local government, in the last 4 days, I have seen no less than 15 articles talking about construction projects in and around Burnham Yard with respect to what's going on in Sun Valley, the National Women's Soccer League, along the riverfront. And there's a lot of excitement and a lot of energy in the city and county of Denver for these projects to move forward. Have we engaged in any meaningful way with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure in the city and county of Denver, with the city council, or with the mayor's office with respect to this and being able to continue to provide services throughout the city and county of Denver, with respect to making sure that we have the proper planning in place to provide services, or understanding what impacts we will see as a transportation agency running on the public right-of-way in Denver?
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Guzman, for the question. I have been engaged with the mayor's office within the city and county of Denver. I have directly spoken to executive staff with the Broncos Football Club and have engaged with the developers as it relates to the stadium relative to the Major League Soccer for women. Recognizing that with Burnham Yard and the potential of the stadium there, which is about 90% there in reference to a path forward. Of course, authorization and things of the like have to go through a process. Quite naturally, some critical elements of sites being selected is the access points relative to public transportation, which are critically important, relative to the soccer stadium for women, keeping in mind with the developers, part of the site selection had to do with transportation in and of itself. I have made it clear that RTD will be at the table. We are not at that place whereby representatives from the city and county are talking about planning phases, but quite naturally recognizing the ongoing and recurring meetings that I do have with the leadership within the city and county of Denver, quite naturally, that will be first and foremost as we move forward. We're just not at a place, but conversations have ensued. And just yesterday, I talked to a high-ranking official within the city and county of Denver about some parcels in and around Burnham Yard that may be warranted. And at this juncture, I'd be remiss to talk about that in a public setting as it relates to where we stand currently. But I want to assure you that I have good working relationships with those representatives and that we're moving forward. And members of my leadership team in particular will be at the table contingent upon the subjects and the acumen that we possess relative to ensuring that there is thoroughfares in which that can be leveraged, and more to the point, quite naturally looking at it from a mechanical safety vantage point, because that's incredibly important as we look at what faces us as we move forward. Thank you.
Does that
Thank you
satisfy
very
your question? Good. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Director. Any further comments or discussion on this item? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Davies, and be ready because you're the next item on our list, and that is the 2026 Draft Legislative and Government Relations Program. Mr. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer, would you please present this?
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. Bringing forward as a discussion item this month. It is in staff's intent to bring this item back as an action item next month. And as a reminder, RTD a few years back now started the process of developing a legislative and government relations program. And it really is to have that conversation going into a new year of a legislative session with the board, and really is a guiding document for the board to provide direction and make sure staff is rowing in the same direction as the board with regards to policy, as the board is the policy-making body of the agency. So I'll just go through briefly the draft that I've submitted and is in your packet, and it really covers staff's recommendations with regards to changes from last year's program. There are not a lot of changes. It largely keeps intact last year's program, which highlights a number of policy priorities that this agency has approved in the past. But the major additions really have to do with the federal government. And that the reason for that is because the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill is up for renewal. It expires September 30th of 2026. So we have just about a year before the federal authorizing bill, which are generally 5-year to 6-year long bills, and authorize the policy separate from the appropriations. Authorizing bills set the policy, and then appropriations appropriate dollars on an annual basis to those authorized programs. So it really is the policy place for transit to be changed or created for, again, a multi-year period. With regards to those priorities, there's 3 simple ones that I've laid out as a recommended path forward for surface transportation authorization. And again, that doesn't cover absolutely every policy idea that may be important to this agency, but it highlights the priorities. And of course, it's kind of going along the idea of if you prioritize everything, nothing is prioritized. So I want to pick 3 areas that are really important and connect with policy areas that you all have talked about and that we continue to talk about as an agency. First, just supporting growth within the transit formula program. That is the bulk of where RTD gets our federal grant funding is through the formula programs. It is really meant to support agencies and specifically RTD with regards to state of good repair. I know we've talked a lot about as an agency our transit asset management plan and our state of good repair needs. That is an important grant funding area for us, and we'd like to see that grow. The last surface transportation authorization, which is currently in effect now for the next year, really did make some efforts to try to grow transit funding. Unfortunately, we also had a lot of inflation during that last 5 years, and it ate away at some of the growth that was really intended under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So it's a priority, I think, for RTD. It's a priority for the transit industry as a whole to see the formula funding grow above the baseline levels. And that's simply the first priority. Number 2, outline flexibility in the competitive bus grant program. And this, again, goes to some of those state of good repair needs. RTD knows that we are going to want to compete in competitive bus programs to be able to support procurements in the future. And given the state of manufacturing in the bus industry in the United States, providing flexibility for agencies to make localized decisions and use those dollars in the most effective way during a procurement, I think is just a good idea and a good priority. It again aligns with a lot of the priorities that we've heard at the national level at APTA as well. And then lastly, with regards to the Highway Trust Fund, it is to support new revenues for the Highway Trust Fund. Any new revenues that are added to be allocated according to the traditional 80-20 split. And so this goes back to, and I spoke to the board prior when Congress was considering the reconciliation bill. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee passed new fees associated with trying to shore up the Highway Trust Fund. And they did not allocate that in that process, and this would really belong in the surface transportation reauthorization discussion. But this is simply to say that if new fees, which of course I think anybody in the transit industry would support, we know new funding is needed. And right now, as a reminder, it's a mix of federal gas tax fees that go into the Highway Trust Fund and general fund transfers that really make up how we fund surface transportation bills. So this is to say that if new fees get authorized by Congress, that those fees are also split according to the traditional 80-20 split. And that's 80% of Highway Trust Fund dollars going to highway programs and 20% going to transit programs. And that is the long-standing relationship that we have had with our partners on the highway side of surface transportation. Lastly, I would say that in terms of changes from last year, and you'll see this, of course, outlined in the submitted documents in your packet, are some deletions of ideas that we had advocated for last year. One of them being what Director O'Keefe mentioned earlier, and that is having to do with assaults on transit workers and protecting transit workers. We advocated for legislation there. The legislature did pass and move the needle slightly on that topic. And so this is just simply to remove that item and see if there's a path forward in the future, pending data and pending conversations with lawmakers. Lastly, RTD had asked for funding last year to help support zero fare for youth programs. And the legislature last year was not interested in trying to help us out in that. Originally, RTD did create the Zero Fare for Youth program using state grant dollars. That was at a time when the state had a little bit more flexibility with their state funding and had some federal funding that they could pass through to entities like RTD for that purpose. There was no excess dollars, as many of you may know, from last year, and it does not look like the state's budget scenario is going to be in a better place this year. So I think just from a realistic standpoint, there's not going to be a lot of appetite or opportunities for the state to fund that. And of course, RTD has continued the Zero Fare for Youth program and made that a permanent fare change as part of our fare policy. So it is just removing that item because the reality is there's not a lot of appetite at the state to help fund that type of a program. So with that, those are the major changes in the program. I do want to touch briefly, and RTD did solicit with directors to submit ideas, and I received 2 submissions, one from Director O'Keefe with regards to the transit worker assaults and protection legislation, and that was really to revisit changing the penalties from a misdemeanor to a to a felony charge. And per my discussion during the last item with Director O'Keefe, again, to state, there's not a lot of opportunity at this point or appetite from supporters of last year's bill to revisit that this year. And really, at this point, would just on that item, before I move to the next suggestions, and the next suggestions were all from Director Nicholson, and there's 8 of them total, so I can go through those. But before I move on, really looking for direction from the committee and kind of how you'd like us as a staff to respond. And before I turn it over, I see General Manager Johnson's hand up as well.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Just one clarification to Mr. Davies' report. Did receive some input from a Director Harwick, but in relation to what he had submitted, it was more within the board operating guidelines as opposed to part of a legislative program. So I just wanted to note that for the record, and we responded accordingly as it related to the appropriateness within the board's auspices. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Davies. I do see Treasurer Banker. You have your hand up.
Yes, I also had submitted a request, and this, of course, has to do with funding. I've gotten a very short response from you, CEO Johnson, that has to do with taking a look at the tolls. This was a recommendation or suggestion that came from someone from Greater Denver Transit, and the more I look into it, the more I think it's actually quite brilliant. So we're looking for money. The legislature is always asking us, do you have any suggestions on where we can find dollars? Okay, so here's the suggestion, and that is there are a number of tolling entities in the RTD district. The one that's going up US 36, I-25, and E-470. I don't have the time to do the legislative research to go into each one to see whether or not it might be possible to put a small fee on any of them or all of them to generate some additional money for transit service. I think each one has got its own unusual, peculiar idiosyncrasies, but it seems to me that reading into the legislation, looking at the contracts to find, I'm not asking for another toll. I'm asking for perhaps a small fee that would be levied on top of a toll. I would really appreciate a deep dive to see whether or not any of those 3 entities might be able to generate some revenue for RTD. And I see Director Catlin has her hand up because I know she's been very much involved with this years ago when this started with CDOT. So I at least like to put this on the table because it seems to me the relationship between toll revenue and transportation is pretty close. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I may, since Director Banker did reference me, so everybody understands the nature of the response in which I provided, Director Banker and I had the opportunity to meet last Thursday, and we had a conversation as it revolved around tolls and things of the like. I shared with her that I would engage with members of my team and that we would delve into this matter, of which we did at some point, recognizing it was Thursday and today is Thursday. What I did provide relative to US 36 was about the tolls, and we had the opportunity to confer with the Deputy Executive Director at CDOT, recognizing the aspects of the tolls and then the enterprises that have auspices over those. Keeping in mind, at the federal level, let me be clear that tolls on highways can be used to support transit. What we were trying to do, recognizing the entities that oversee that, while there is nothing that would preclude us from doing that, I was giving a limited response and saying that yes, we could check into it, and keeping in mind that more specifically as it relates to joint service relative to intercity passenger rail, and recognizing the players that comprise the Joint Service Executive Oversight Committee, the response in which we got really was in alignment with that could possibly be an option as we move forward. So I just wanted to ensure that everybody had the same information, which I had provided Director Banker. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that. And I'll yield the floor to Mr. Davies. Should he have something additional to add? Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager Johnson. I'll just add that it is also not prohibited at the state level, and specifically in state law as well. You can use revenues from a toll to support transit as well.
Okay, so this is something that we might want to do a little bit more research, and I would love to actually to just have some information to see how much the current tolls on these highways are bringing in. I've tried going to their website and I could not find that kind of revenue information, but it'd be interesting to see how revenue producing these tolls are. And then, of course, to make sure we do our research and we find out whether or not there might be any interest with some of our legislators to perhaps look into it and carry a bill. But it would seem to me, since the state legislature is always asking us, do you have any other ideas on how they can help us find money for transit? I think this one would be excellent to go and talk to some of the legislators and see what they think. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Banker. Director Catlin?
I'd be really careful about this. Certainly you can look into it, but CTIO, which is the state agency, definitely there would be some opportunities to explore that. But the public highway authorities, that being E470 and Northwest Parkway, are completely different enabling legislation and governing bodies. And I would be very careful about that. But to your point about going to their websites, there are different websites for each agency. And I know that the budget and the revenue for E470, they're very transparent about their finances. CTIO, not quite as much. And for the record, I am still on a non-voting member on the board of E470. And I just would encourage a cautionary approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So I, as Mr. Davies mentioned, had a number of suggestions. I believe that Director Guzman, have you had a chance to speak yet about what you had raised your hand about?
I believe he lowered his hand in reference to what Director Catlin said.
Got it.
The
All
floor
right.
is still yours.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, I had a few suggestions. I feel like there are a number of parts to what we have that sort of ignore the political side of the agenda with regard to the likely changes that will come from the Accountability Committee. And so I was hoping we could take some of these in turn. Now, this is a discussion item, so we won't be voting on this until next month. But to go over the issues that I would like to see incorporated, the first is to oppose any changes to the structure of the board of directors without having voter approval. So the original board was put into place by the voters, the original elected board in 1980. I believe that we should take the position quite clearly that any changes to the structure of the board of directors should require voter approval. That's number one. Number two, to oppose the addition of appointed officials as members of the board of directors. This is an elected board. There are not any boards in the country that have a hybrid of elected and appointed members that I am aware of. And I think that it behooves us to make it clear that this needs to remain an elected board. Number three, oppose any changes to the structure of the board of directors until after the 2030 redistricting process. I do not believe it is in the interest of a sorry, let me put that a different way. This board has been in existence for 45 years in its current form. I don't believe that rushing such changes, such that they would take place in the middle of a term of current directors or those of directors who are going to be elected next year, is in the interest of building a board that can last. I believe it would overly politicize the changes that would be discussed. So I believe we should seriously consider saying that these changes, if there are to be any changes, go into effect with the already existing 2030 redistricting cycle. Number four, supporting increased compensation for the board of directors. I think we all recognize that this is a significant amount of work, and that if we are doing the job that the amount of work that this job requires, especially when it comes to our chair, who is overworked and significantly underpaid, that we have a responsibility to advocate for effective compensation to allow us to do our jobs. Number five, support legislation which increases equity in transportation access. As I teed up Mr. Davies, there is legislation that is being worked on right now to expand access to the discount program and to reduce barriers for individuals experiencing homelessness to access the access our transit system and transit systems throughout the country. I believe that it should very much be the position of this board that we want to see increased equity and increased access for low-income individuals and individuals experiencing homelessness. Number six. Support legislation which increases housing density or housing supply within the RTD service area. Fundamentally, we are able to run better service when there is higher density. And the more that we see cities and increase housing density, the more we will be able to run effective transit service. That is a simple acknowledged truth by the agency, that we are able to run service better where there is density. Thus, it makes sense for us to be advocating forcefully for increasing density to allow us to run better service. 7, build and maintain relationships with local governments and quasi-governmental organizations, including RNOs and HOAs. Work with these stakeholders to increase adoptions of the RTD transit pass programs. The state legislature has instructed us to increase adoption of the residential EcoPass program. I believe that our government relations team should be actively reaching out to HOAs and other non-governmental agencies that deal with residential planning to increase adoption as much as possible and awareness of the neighborhood EcoPass program. And then number 8, advocate for legislation which requires venues to include RTD passes with their ticket prices. There are many, many large venues throughout the country that include transit passes as part of their tickets for sports arenas, for concerts. And I believe that it is well past time for RTD to make the case, that this should be a default of any large venue in the country. If you have over 1,000 people and you are in the RTD district, especially if you are within half a mile of a transit line, the state should say that it is a responsibility of that venue to provide an RTD pass along with that concert ticket. I believe those are 8 reasonable things for us to advocate for as part of our government relations agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. And of course, this is just a discussion right now. I already know there'll be disagreement most likely on the first 3 in regards to the Accountability Committee's recommendations, but appreciate you bringing that to the discussion. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, I wanted to clarify a comment that Director Nicholson made relative to item 2, where he said that there were not any hybrid boards that consisted of elected officials and non-elected officials, and that is not accurate. I can name 2 off the top of my head, one being the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, second being the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority as well. While they may not be directly elected, there are elected officials and non-elected officials that comprise those transit boards. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson.
Very quickly.
Come on.
Mr. Chair, very quickly.
I'll come back to you. Director Guzman.
Okay.
Thank you. Actually, I don't know when else we would have disagreement and provide direction at the same time for the agency, except in the discussion of an item. So, Mr. Davies, thank you for bringing these forward. I'm content with the federal. I have some questions on discretionary grant section B with respect to how we buy American when there's only limited resources with that in reference to purchase of bus. And then I also would like to know or figure out how this would affect purchase of rail, or if there's a way to support increasing those grant programs to include, this is difficult, electrification or low no emission vehicles to meet some of our state's climate goals. And it doesn't include anything about paratransit either. And so I know that the federal funding, the formulaic funding includes those in different aspects and areas, but there's nothing mentioned here. It's just state of good repair bus and bus infrastructure. And we are a multimodal agency. So I'm a little concerned we're not looking at our other modes. I would also say with respect to state legislature, I would as an individual director oppose governance changes without going to the people. The 1980 vote set a precedent that we need to follow, and I think the board should come together and have a discussion around that. I know that there are going to be disagreements on this particular area, but here are 3 things that we need to consider. 1, the taxpayers still fund RTD, not the state, not in any substantial way. And so the state really doesn't have a reason to appoint anybody. History teaches us that appointments led to a lot of shenanigans by the board members that were here and actually increased the size of the board with additional non-working board members sitting in the wings waiting for an opportunity to get in on the goods. And so having 15 working directors that the people directly elect is going to be an issue we need to talk about as a board. Whether you are in agreement or not about the size of the board, the people told us they wanted to elect us directly. If that has changed, the people should also say that and have the opportunity. While I don't agree with any single director going behind the board's back to find legislation or work on legislation without talking to the rest of us, because I think that removes power from the board, I do appreciate that there are conversations that we are having with our local representatives on how to make things better for RTD and provide lowering bars of access to the public. I just wish that would be done through the proper form, which is this committee, and then coming to the full board to be able to do it. Finally, I will say on Director Nicholson's number 7, which is build the local agency engagement with the NGOs, RNOs, and HOAs. Yes, but how? And it looks very different in Denver than it does in other areas. And what those groups' political capital is within the city and county of Denver may look very different than it does in, let's say, Conifer or in Lone Tree or in Thornton. And so I would be careful about that and approach with caution, only because we don't know what that looks like. And that's the responsibility of each individual director. So in terms of giving you some feedback, Mr. Davies, I would like to see a discussion as part of this about where the board will support or oppose or remain neutral on matters of changing governance with this committee that's doing its work. They are supposed to give feedback about paratransit equity, which is defined clearly as MUD in the legislation, so they don't really know what they're trying to answer for. And at the last meeting, there was no definition of what a problem actually is, just that everybody perceives there to be a problem in terms of governance in the board or the agency, and they couldn't put their finger on it. So I'll be interested to see what they come back with. But again, any suggestion to change the governance structure of the board should go to the voters. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. Any other further comments? Director Nicholson?
Yes. So I apologize if I misspoke earlier. I was specifically referring to a hybrid between directly elected directors and appointed directors. So there are no, to my knowledge, boards in the country where there are individuals who are elected by the public for the role of being a transit board director, and also that have individuals who are appointed by another body, just to be clear.
Thank you for the clarification. So going back to kind of your request, because our Mr. Davies, obviously we're in a discussion item right now. One thing I think that this board of directors will obviously have a reaction and a stance in regards to what comes out of the recommendations of the accountability committee. I do appreciate the suggestions that have been, brought up by directors, but I'll be honest with you right now, Mr. Davies. I think there's multiple different opinions of what potentially will come out from the accountability committee. Me and Director Larson have been serving on it, and the two of us might have very different opinions of what we should see. And at the end of the day, I am a non-voting member, so I can share my input and do what I can. But I think overall, I think there will be a common theme that this board wants to have a chance and a say to react to what comes out of the accountability committee's recommendations in regards to governance, since this is our jobs. But at this time, I wouldn't be able to offer you what that clear direction would be. So, Mr. Davies.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for the directors for providing some comments around that. And just to be clear, really staff in previous bills dealing with the board's governance and matters on that, staff has really not taken a position or weighed in. That is really within the arena of the board to have a discussion on those policy topics. It should be noted that, of course, this government relations program is a living document. And so as you get into the legislative session next year, and if a bill is introduced as a result of the recommendations from the accountability committee, of course, that is an opportunity for this board to then take a position on that bill. Of course, there is always an opportunity for the board to direct staff as a result of discussions in the accountability committee to take positions or advocate on behalf of the board in any pending legislation. So I just offer those up as opportunities to address some of those areas. I would just remind the board, it was this board who did take a position on the legislation last year that created this accountability committee. And so, preempting action right now it does have an impact in terms of how this board communicated last year with regards to this topic. And, with regards to those first four topics that Director Nicholson brought up, it does preempt the discussions that are currently ongoing that you, Chair Bouquet, and Director Larson are actively engaged in. So that's what I have. And with regards to Director Guzman, on the discretionary grant section under the federal, heard loud and clear. And I did have language in there that says, this is included, but not, it is not comprehensive. I did not include every single area that RTD competes for grants, but would be happy to include those items that you mentioned and are certainly included in the work that we do as staff on competitive grant programs and in reviewing and looking at opportunities for the agency to apply for all grant programs at the federal level.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that, Mr. Davis. And further to the point, Director Guzman, just wanted to share in my involvement, I actually chair a legislative committee through APTA, which is federal tax and regulations. And more specifically, I'm on the legislative steering committee. And as we talk about the discretionary grant programs, we have put forward a program via APTA that was adopted by the membership just 10 days ago, in which we're advocating for a split for the betterment of the formulaic grants as we move forward. And then specifically you reference Buy America, but there's also Build America, and keeping in mind with the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, there's some nuanced language there, but I just wanted to ensure that the board is fully aware that Mr. Davies and I are engaged on that topic, and more specifically, as I talk about the leadership position in which I held at APTA in the legislative realm, that we're at the table and we're having these discussions. We'll see what shakes out for all intents and purposes, because I also sit on the bus manufacturing task force as well, considering the limitation in OEMs within the rubber tire fleets, whereby we're working directly with the Federal Transit Administration as well as with the two original equipment manufacturers here in the United States. So I just wanted to qualify that. And on the other face of it, in reference to the SIG program, capital investment grants, there's modifications being made to that. And we too are engaged in those discussions, submitting recommendations as what might be optimal for transit entities across the US. So thank you for the opportunity to share that additional information.
Thank you very much. Director O'Keefe. Oh. Never mind. Okay. Sorry, Director, did you want to speak or no? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, without any...
Sorry, Chair Bouquet. I think Director O'Keefe is trying to say something, but his audio has gone out.
Oh, yeah, we can't hear you. Sorry, Director O'Keefe.
No.
All right, how's now?
That's perfect. Thank you, sir.
I only went through about 3 different microphones. Just my personal experience in dealing with federal, state, local, non-US, that reacting with a set of very specific edicts from the board before we know what we're reacting to, I think puts us in a position where we have played our hand, and the committee could come up with something entirely different, and we've played our hand that's what we want. And I think one of the things that's not true, but they're using, that I've heard in context from board members on the accountability committee, is obstinance from the board, and we're just going to do it to them. And I think the more we look like that, the more challenge we have with what I believe is going to be a very tense negotiation. So I'd rather keep our cards now, and I think everyone knows our opinion up there, and play them at the appropriate time. There are things that I would like to make sure that are integrated into that thought and are kind of in front of our board as we're considering accountability. And I assume that's accountability to our citizens, accountability to the taxpayers, accountability to the riders, right? It's not accountability to the legislature, even though they might believe that's what it is. The Denver metro area and RTD have changed a lot. I pulled it up. We have 1 million more people since 2000, just just since 2000. You go back to 1990, we're probably 3 times bigger or something. And that growth didn't happen in the urban core predominantly. It happened outward, and you can blame urban sprawl for all you want. It's a fact. Our population, when RTD passed something like fast tracks, was in a tighter circle. We're now in a bigger circle. And what we need to serve those outlying areas and be accountable to the taxes paid equally by those people, whether they sit in Douglas County or central Denver. I think that's one of the things that's missing. And that's where a lot of the frustration is coming from. The city's grown, but our financial circumstance has caused us to shrink the service that we're providing to them. So we have this tension of accountability to the people paying for the system that aren't getting that service. And I don't think it's about elected or appointed as much as how we best serve that population. And right now I can tell you, Douglas County, you could drive around for an entire day and you wouldn't see an RTD bus. It'd be dumb luck that you came across one. So but pay a lot of taxes here. So I think we've got to resolve that tension is with the accountability committee. Hopefully if they listen, there are great members on that committee. I'm actually optimistic that we can get that point across. And the circumstances inside the city have changed too. The cost of housing, the dislocation of communities, those things are all different from the last time we looked at it. And I don't think we should start with a change isn't good. I think we let the discussion go forward, trust the board members, and be ready to react with those kind of circumstances. And it's probably something that's worth a discussion in a study session. What do we think what does accountability mean? Not we're opposed to what they're doing. So that would be my 2 cents on what I think is going to be probably our number one topic in the legislature this year.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Keith. Yeah, I think, serving on it, I think there's been actually some pretty good discussions. Our last in-person discussion was really beneficial. I would encourage people to, look at the minutes or the recording of it, because there's there's a good conversations, and, who we ultimately serve are the people, and we want to make sure we're having conversations that are beneficial to the people that we serve. And change isn't always bad. There can be good change as well. So, all right, any further discussion on this item? Well, thank you all. And thank you, Mr. Davies, for the presentation of this item. Greatly appreciated. All right, moving on, we're going to go to our third and final item, and that is the Board Office Budget Review. Mr. Kroll, Board Office Executive Manager, would you please present this item at this time?
Great. Thank you all. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do. Yes, we can. And we will do.
See my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, this discussion item originated with a change to the bylaws that you all made in December/November meeting cycle of last year, in which you updated the responsibilities of a number of committees, including the executive committee, and you clarified that the executive committee would be responsible for reviewing the board office's budget on an annual basis. The approval process for the budget is separate from this. This is simply a review, a time to provide input and feedback, and then ultimately, as I'll indicate here at the end of the presentation, the agency budget process will follow what you typically followed in previous years, with the Finance Committee reviewing it this month and then acting on it during the November meeting cycle. So I know this is the last agenda item of the day, and I intend to move through this pretty quickly. We're going to cover 4 major topics: just overview of the budget, look at how the board office's budget has compared to actual spending over the last few years, and then look ahead to 2026. At that point, then I would be happy to entertain any questions or comments. So the board office is very committed to being a good partner, not only with the board, but also with the agency. We are very committed here to regularly reviewing our budget, being fiscally responsible and avoiding over budgeting. And there'll be some slides on that speak to that effort in a moment. And obviously engaging with you all as the board to ensure that we're meeting your needs as directors. We are a small but mighty team here in the board office. You can see there our organizational chart. This should be familiar to all of you as we presented this multiple times throughout the orientation process for incoming board members as well. What we do fundamentally, I think, is broken down into these 5 things. Effectively customer service, producing the board meetings, maintaining the records of the board, liaising and collaborating with staff, and serving as a strategic thought partner to the board and directors with respect to your role in governing and setting policy. A 6th item, if you would, give me the privilege of adding. I think oftentimes we are also helpful in helping you all engage with your constituents across the district. What we have, this is our appropriation from the board, and those of you who have been on the board for a while may be used to seeing the board office budget kind of conglomerated into one. I'm really working to separate the board office budget into kind of 2 distinct categories. One where you have those operations that support the board, and then one sort of category of the budget where you have funding that is directly, or at least very directly tied to individual directors. So, salary and benefits, you may have seen that reported in previous years' budgets as one item, including salary and benefits from board office staff, as well as the director stipends. And I think it's just important to disaggregate those for ease of clarity and understanding. And the final thing here on this list, the 2 other things on this item here, director internet and phone, that is going to be the monthly IT stipends that you all receive through the board's expense and reimbursement policy. And then your director's expenses is predominantly made up of the allocations you all afford yourselves through the director expense and reimbursement policy for travel, conference, and local expenditures. The service, I should mention here a large item on the left-hand side, the services expenditure. This is predominantly for the production of board meetings, the licensing of the software we need to produce board meetings, as well as provisions of services during board meetings. When we all meet downstairs at RT&D, we have an outside contractor that comes in and supports the video production of that. And we also, of course, as you all know, provide cart services at all of our board meetings and committee meetings. So there are a couple of 2025 initiatives that have influenced the budget for this year. One is, as many of you are aware, we are in the process of procuring a replacement to our board packet software. And so we've gone through a number of steps to have funding included for that in the budget. And I'm hopeful that we can facilitate a closing out of that procurement process by the end of the year. And then this year, you all also added a mid-year retreat, which, while not massively expensive by any means, does have an impact. And while it for this year led to an expenditure increase in that area, I think it actually showed a good proof of concept that the board could explore for next year and future years, which is, continuing to host those retreats on site. That can save a significant amount of funding, as well as, going with more internal sources for facilitation of those retreats. Now I'm going to just quickly cover our budget to actual expenditures over the last few years. You can see the budgeted amount is somewhat stable, if not declining, between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. And then the actual expenditures, though, are increasing. And the actual expenditures are increasing due to a number of things relative to 2023. I started in my role in mid-June of 2023. So that had a significant impact as there was ongoing salary savings from the role being vacant. And then you all have returned to travel significantly since post-pandemic, and there's additional director expenditures going on. Nothing over the limits, of course, but oftentimes directors, as is noted above in the budget variance factors, directors don't always travel or seek reimbursements up to your stated limits. And this is also a good slide to show, and what I'll indicate here in subsequent slides, the efforts we're taking to ensure that we're not over budgeting and that we're budgeting the right amount to meet the board's needs. And speaking of which, we have taken a number of steps here over the last few years since I've taken over the role of the board office executive manager to decrease our budgeted annual expenditures. And there's just a simple list there of items that we have determined are not necessary because we simply weren't spending the funds. Obviously, in the future, as demand may change, that's an ongoing conversation that we can have if we need to bring back additional funding for certain things. But on that note, I'll just finally point out, we're anticipated still this year to come in under budget relative to actual expenditures. So, I'm not seeing a pressing need at this juncture to expand the budget for certain items that we've trimmed in recent years. Budget expenses increased. Certainly salaries and benefits have increased commensurate with salaries and benefit increases across the agency. There's additional CART costs. This number here is by no means reflective of the annual amount we're spending on CART. There is just going to be a need to budget for additional CART expenses for next year relative to our expenditure rate for this year. And then we added, as you all may be aware, there are 2 external members of the board's audit committee. And so including budget for those board members to also be those committee members to also be afforded the monthly IT stipend that directors use. And this is reasonable given the fact that those committees are remote, and we do supply the audit committee members with RTD devices to participate in those. One-time budgeted expense increase for this year was related to board office asset procurement. And what I'll highlight here is if you actually remove that one-time expenditure increase from the blue line here, we're pretty much on par with the fiscal year 2023 budget. So we've been doing I think a really good job of trying to hold down those budgeted expenses. And then lastly, I'm just going to talk about a few things with respect to next year. On this slide, I do want to kick it over to Chairman Bouquet to talk about the second bullet point. But we are, as I mentioned, looking to finalize the implementation of a new meeting and agenda development and packet software. And that does have the potential for some ongoing cost savings in that line item. And then before I kick it over to Chair Bouquet, I do want to just highlight the bottom bullet point there again. We do spend about $26,000 on retreats at the beginning of each year. Most of that is due to facilitation costs, with some of that coming from facilities costs and other meeting production costs. And so there's an opportunity there as the board looks to plan ahead, and we will need to get going on this soon for retreat planning for the beginning of next year. And so with that, I will hand things quickly over to Chairman Bouquet to talk about the second item.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kroll, and thank you for the presentation. And big one is thank you for the work you've done to help save, taxpayer dollars ultimately. Just to be honest, we all know where we're going. I mean, financial forecasts are kind of grim everywhere, and I do believe that we as directors can do our part going forward in trying to find what cost savings we can for the taxpayer dollars. When I first got into the board in 2021, after being elected in 2020, we were recovering from shortfalls due to the COVID-19 impacts. And one of the things that we went forward with was eliminating all travel and conference registration. I believe going into 26, it might be more than appropriate to not eliminate all travel and conference registration, but potentially reducing that to half. As a reduction to try to save the agency some money. Another one that I think we could be looking at as well is limiting our local expenses to no more than, probably 3,000, and that would be a budget reduction of 72,000 for one time. I think this is one thing that, obviously I want to hear committee members' inputs. I want to hear director inputs on this to me, this seems like a model we've done in the past. Like I said, we did this in 2021, where it was all our travel and conference registration expenses were eliminated. And I think this is a more than fair, potential option for us to look at a reduction of half in regards to that travel expenses and conference registrations. For us, instead of going to 2 conferences a year, you would have it where you're going to 1 conference a year. So directors still have the ability to go and get that professional development that, is needed for newer directors and directors who have been on the board for quite a while, but at the same time hitting what our financial reality is and doing what we can to help positively, impact our budget. The other thing that Mr. Kroll brought up, we did have our mid-year retreat happen at Blake Street. We've had it in the past where that beginning of the year retreat happening in February. I think that's another one. I know I'm jumping a little bit to bullet point 3, but I think that is a huge example of where we can save money in regards to an external facilitation. So just wanted to hit on that, not to steal your thunder or anything, Mr. Kroll, but I think that's another option for us to look into if instead of having an external location for our beginning of the year retreat, potentially just hosting it at Blake to save some money. So I'll send it back to you, Mr. Kroll.
Great. I just have one last slide. Many of you, have come to me as board members and asked, how can we and where can we get potential more support in the board office? And this was a proposal that I put through the agency's budget development process to add a couple of staff members to assist with policy and constituent matters. A couple of reasons behind this. This is, again, responsive to feedback from board members. You all set at your retreat, the aforementioned retreat on February 1st this year, 3 goals, 2 of which were to expand your outreach to the communities that you represent and to improve upon the board's capacity to effectuate its policy agenda. So working off of those 2 goals for the board, I put forward this proposal, also recognizing that we've seen a significant increase in director inquiries relative to 2022, and that creates additional administrative burdens on the office to manage with existing staff. And, given the realities that the agency is facing, the budget for these positions is not currently available, but I will continue to seek funding in future budget cycles. And with that, that concludes my presentation, other than one quick slide here to remind everyone of the timeline. You're going to vote as a board on the 5-year financial forecast at the end of this month, and then the Finance and Planning Committee will pick up the review of the agency's budget, and the board office's budget for next year will be approved alongside the budget for the agency on December 2nd. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. First Vice Chair O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for making the kind of tough move of identifying potential sources of reduction. One thing I'd ask you and Mr. Kroll to consider is if we end up reducing, I would argue that it would be better to just combine to a single budget for each board member. You'd still have guidance. You can, you only can get $120 for local IT. You only can get so much for your phone, but it's all the same pool. So each district is different. And I think that gives more flexibility for a director as an independently elected person to best serve their district and not necessarily reduce down everything equally, but give some discretion to elected directors to decide how to best spend that money.
Duly noted. Thank you, sir. Secretary Nicholson.
So this is an interesting one. I have sort of 2 orthogonal concerns here. The first one I'll say is that I agree 100% with what E.M. Kroll raised about the capacity of the board office. I think that we have put significant demands on the time of staff and specifically on his time, because really there's only one policy staffer, one administrative staffer in the board office at the moment. And we have made, and I'm certainly one of them, a significant number of requests around development of policy and around development of amendments, and just, for 15 people, I think it's become exceedingly clear to me that there are a lot of people on the board who want advice, guidance, and who want individuals in the board office to help make these types of policy change possible. So I believe that that's going to continue. Just, speaking frankly, having gotten to know people who are running in 2026, I do not see this as something that will go away. I think it is something that will continue to increase. Yes, there are limitations on funding right now, but we also should not be penny wise and pound foolish. We are the responsible party for governing this agency. We are a policy board. And if we are not equipped to make policy, if we do not have that muscle in an effective manner, then we are surrendering our primary responsibility in doing that. So I strongly understand where he's coming from, and I agree with it. In regard to cuts, one of the things that I have noticed with regard to my own use of funds is that there is a wide array of value that I think we as board members get from various different types of travel. And I think that asking the question of what are we trying to do with that travel and what are we expecting to get out of it is a very reasonable one if we're looking to cut costs. The most valuable travel that I have done so far, no question, was the conference here in Denver, the Sustainability and Planning Conference, for which I didn't have to pay travel. I didn't have to pay lodging because it was right here. I was also the only board member to attend, but I learned a great deal about how the planning process works, about sustainability. I got to talk to lots of interesting people. And by contrast, I honestly felt like the directors' conference was not very useful and was not a great use of money. And so I think that asking the chair next year, whoever that is, to perhaps look at what sorts of travel expenses the board actually wants people to be doing and not just say, oh, go to whatever you want to, travel to wherever you want to, might be more effective at aligning the money that we are spending with things that will actually prove to be useful to educating directors, and not just sending people to conferences with, $400 hotel rooms. So that would be where I come down on that one.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Treasurer Banker.
2 comments. One is, yes, I am open to cutting our expense budget, but I also do like the idea of giving the directors some flexibility as to where they'd like to have the cut. So it would be great, if the number is selected that we cut $2,000 or $3,000 from our expense budget. I'm fine with that, but I'd like to be able to be the one to decide where those cuts should be. So it's just more flexibility for the director, basically. With regard to the request, I did have a conversation a while ago with Mr. Kroll, and he did come to me with a request, as all executive director members here, asking for 2 additional FTE. And I will tell you at the time, sorry, Jack, but at that time I said, I'm really not interested in expanding board staff. Although if you gave me additional information with specific job responsibilities, I would certainly be open and consider it. Now, several months later, with the experience that I've had with the information I have been gathering and the training I've gone through and my learning process, I now do see great value in expanding RTD board staff. Now, can we do it in the 2026 budget? Probably not. But I do want to now voice my approval for having some additional expertise be available to board members, where if we need information from across the country, from EPTA, or if we need a little bit more information that our other staff are not providing and we need more of it, I would be now in favor. So depending on how our finances go, which I know we're going to be talking quite a bit about in just a couple of weeks, and if the economy is not as bad as we're all starting to predict for next year, maybe we could do a budget amendment at some point and have a discussion and see whether or not we should go in that direction. But thank you very much, Jack, board staff. You guys are fabulous. I really enjoy working with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Guzman.
Hey, I'll be quick. Perfectly fine with making changes to the allotments for a single year. I think Director O'Keefe hit it right on the head. Allow directors to have discretion with their funds, because you're expecting us to simultaneously be experts in our field as directors, and also get the proper training to do our job and seek understanding and knowledge, and to engage with the public. And yet we're being told we are spending too much money doing that. So which is it, right? Like, what are we doing? And I find it funny. The other part of it is we do need to make cuts. And so I am happy to support that if we do it in a way that makes sense for directors. There's a lot of free opportunities. They are addressed in the training policy that was passed by the board last year, which I would remind you does allot a specific amount of training opportunities and conference registrations to the directors based on our precedent. So we would be suspending that policy, hopefully not indefinitely. So whatever comes back to the board for approval, I would expect to see some limitations on it so that we can review this in the following year and see where we're at. It may have to happen for a few years in a row. That's not uncommon when it comes to Colorado's finances. So I'm perfectly okay with that, but we can't just let it go. We need to look at those opportunities for training, which are coming with the expectation that I've heard and that were expressed even in last week's meeting about, or earlier this week's meeting about, you know, what expertise do board members need to have to be able to do this job properly? And without those funds, we can't get that knowledge. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Kroll.
Thank you, Chair Bouquet. I think I have some solid consensus here. One thing to note with respect to the current expense policy is that the funds that are allocated for travel and local can be effectively, you can spend travel funds on local allocations and local funds on travel costs. But I hear you all, and given that it's already somewhat flexible, I will take a look to see what can be done with the budget team to maybe combine those on the back end into, you know, one sort of fund type or speed type. And then I'm hearing that you are open to considering a resolution at the October meeting whereby you all would take a one-time action to potentially limit your expense allocations for 2025, or excuse me, 2026. Is that the consensus I'm getting? I want to just make sure, because we'll have to queue that up. Okay. I mean, nothing's solidified until you pass it. And then the final thing I'll mention is it is on the work plan to bring back, subsequent to the results of the board director's expense and audit that is ongoing and was approved in your annual audit plan. There is a plan to bring back the board's expense and reimbursement policy, at which point you could make a formal action to kind of combine those two travel and local accounts, or in addition to your monthly IT stipends as well. So.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with what Director O'Keefe and Director Banker brought up. I think, you know, exploring it of, you know, just one fund and seeing how directors can and can't use it, but at the same time, you know, being cost saving to the taxpayers, I think is crucial during some economically hard times coming up. I will make one note too in regards to the acquisition of potentially 2 of the expansion of the board office staff. One, there has been conversations, if you do listen to the accountability committee, of looking for expertise in regards to having a transit expert report directly, to the board, and potentially do policy and research for that. So I do think that position is needed. Again, the question is it going to be in 26? It's not looking great now, but I think honestly, the results of what comes from the accountability committee are going to be huge, because you might be hearing from the accountability committee that they want a, full-time person to be, that transit policy individual to support the board. There is a desire, from what I've heard from the conversations that I've been part of. And we don't know how the board might look in the next couple of years as well. So I think that's going to be a major factor going forward. So, but I think what you've shown, Mr. Kroll, has been excellent, has been great. And I think down the pipeline, I think it's something we can explore. So, all right, any further comments or conversations regarding this third and final item? Okay, well, thank you all for the great discussion so far. Moving on, we are in other matters. Are there any other matters we'd like to discuss at this time? Director Banker.
Yes, I think many of you know, although I didn't do too many emails here, that I'm very interested in restarting Broncos Ride and Rockies Ride and special services and concert services and marching services. And also keep in mind, there's going to be another No Kings March, the third Saturday, I believe, of October. And I suspect there's going to be huge crowds. I have been convinced by a few folks to wait a month, but I do have 5 directors so far that have signed or will agree to sign a petition to move this request forward. So I just wanted to mention that, let everybody be alerted. I will talk to Ian, director, and ask him, well, and also Kathleen. Kathleen and I have already talked about this too. To perhaps bring it to the operations committee meeting if they can. But I am resolute in bringing this forward because we've had it for decades, extremely successful. In fact, even when I was at the accountability committee just the other day, I was talking to Jack about how do I go about doing this. And the chair of the accountability is walking by and she says, "Oh, Karen, hey, how about the Broncos Ride? When are you guys going to do that?" It was just fortuitous. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up that it's coming, and we'll be asking for additional information, and hopefully staff is going to help us with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Banker. Any further matters to discuss? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to note that our next meeting is actually going to be next Tuesday, September 30th from 4 to 5 p.m. That is going to be a special executive committee meeting. And again, committee members, please make sure you are present for that, because that will be in regards to sharing performance feedback for Mr. Kroll. So we hope that you're able to attend that meeting from 4 to 5 in person at Blake prior to our actual scheduled monthly meeting. Our next regular scheduled meeting is going to be October 23rd for this executive committee, and that'll be at 11:15 a.m. And we will be covering quite a bit on this, which is going to be our 2026 legislative program and 2026 legislative program, and then the reappointment of members of the Citizen Advisory Committee. We also have a number of discussion items slated for that meeting, including the 2026 meeting calendar, the bylaw related to board office executive manager, the board collaboration tool platform pilot as well. And as always, we'll have our government relations report from Mr. Davies. With that being said, I will now take a motion to adjourn.
I moved.
All right, I have O'Keefe as the mover. We are adjourned as of 12:48 p.m. Thank you all for joining us, and have a lovely day.